Hello and welcome to Harbor Media. I'm Joe Collymore and we're here at Hingham Police Department and we're meeting with Police Chief David Jones to talk about the state of art relative to policing and the need for a public safety complex here in the town of Hingham. Good morning, Chief Jones. How are you today?
Good morning. Very good.
We would like to talk about where you are as a police department, this facility that resides as part of a larger complex here with Town Hall and the Hingham Public School System. How long has the police department been in this particular building?
So the police station moved here as part of the Town Hall complex in 1998.
And in that move, and we're talking, almost 20 plus years ago, the state of art of policing has changed and evolved over that period of time. So let's talk about what some of the biggest challenges you have here in this particular facility. What might they be?
So the biggest challenge that we have really relative to this current station is space. When we moved in here, we almost immediately outgrew it. We found that we were using space that was otherwise intended for, office or some other purpose was being used as storage because we just simply didn't have the space to store, the equipment and the records, et cetera, that police departments need.
Now, when you talk about storage, and let's start with staffing. The average number of staff per shift, for example, might be how many?
So we have 53 officers, top to bottom. And there's approximately 13 officers, sworn officers assigned per shift. Obviously all 13 aren't in the same day. There's officers have days off, et cetera. So there might be 8 to 9 officers that come in per shift. And then there's civilian staff also that works during the day. And then we have part-time, we call them special police officers. We have 20 of those as well.
And how many parking spaces at any given point in time for that number of staff?
So we only have 21 parking spaces.
And they're taken up primarily by our cruisers?
We have exactly 21 police vehicles as well. So if all the police vehicles are here, we have no parking.
So that's definitely one of the areas that needs improvement. Yeah. Chief, let's talk about administration and how much space you're operating in terms of all the administrative functions that take place here in the department.
So the administration in this building is on the second floor. We lost a large portion of our administrative wing when the Regional Dispatch Center came in. So what used to be our records area, which had a public lobby for the public to come in and request anything from an accident report, police report, or to even see anybody administration, so the chief or the deputy or anybody that works up there. They'd have that area to go to. We lost that when the Regional Dispatch Center moved in. They took that area over. So our records department was moved from that large, office area with a public lobby into what used to be the chief's conference room for administration. So that's where they'd house, a staff meeting or something like that. So that's now our records clerk's office. If the public has to come in now to get an accident report or police report, they have to go into a stairwell, the stairwell between the first and second floor, and speak to the records clerk through like a mail slot in the door. And they hand things back that way. There is no counter or any other way for them to interact with record staff. So they're conducting business through a mail slot that you literally pull up in the door and hand things back and forth through. So they sort of lost that whole area. That space was almost immediately outgrown also when we moved in here. So we have people that share offices now. For an office that was designed for one person, now there's 2 desks in that office, sort of kitty corner and sort of facing each other in odd angles. So obviously, in police administration, you may, find the need to, to speak to an officer or another colleague, and there's no privacy up there in those offices that are sharing space now. Another area that's really sort of lacking upstairs is our detectives area. We talked about before those interview rooms and everything. Well, there is no interview room up there or anywhere for detectives to privately hold a conversation with somebody. In fact, there's the 4 detectives are in one large room, well, not so large room, but they're all sort of crammed in there and all their desks are sort of facing each other. And they have nowhere to hold any sort of like an information exchange. If they have an outside agency come in that they're working on a case with or something, they don't have anywhere to sit and have the discussion with them because we lost that conference room upstairs also. So the second floor administration area is very undersized here as well, and just not, you can't operate efficiently up there.
Let's talk about what the average citizen who has need to come to the police department, what's their first visual experience walking into the lobby here? What's that going to be like?
So normally everyone who's visiting the police station would come through this door here, which is the main entrance to the police station. They walk into the lobby area. It's very small for a police department our size. We have our unwanted medicine drop box in there. So people would be coming in for that. People could be coming in to report a crime, ask directions. They could be picking up a prisoner that's being bailed out. They could be looking for a lost and find item. They could be coming in there for any number of purposes in that lobby area.
And when you talk about for any number of purposes, the singular most concern, I think, would be for privacy, confidentiality.
Correct.
How does this lobby fail to lend itself to that type of confidentiality in today's current state of policing?
So in this lobby, there is no privacy at all, actually. There's no separate space where you could bring a victim of a crime to talk to. Even a crime that someone might not think is sensitive, like their identity was stolen or something like that, you could be sitting there speaking with an officer in that same small area, and you'd have to give them your name, your address, your date of birth, your social security number, and anything that might have been stolen with your identity, etc. At the same time, someone could be 3 feet away from you returning or putting in the unwanted medicine box some prescription medication. They could be coming in to report a crime to the desk officer. They could be looking for directions or anything else while that person's sitting less than 10 feet away and can overhear everything. So there is no privacy in that current lobby that we have.
Let's now talk about the evidence room, and from the standpoint of how evidence is what we call high density storage.
Right.
And what are some of the challenges that you face today in this present facility with regard to evidence?
So evidence that's brought into the police station from an officer at the scene or maybe recovered during a booking of a prisoner coming in is brought into a common area where the officers are also doing their reports. The officer would log the evidence in and put it into either an evidence locker or a drop box where then the person who's in charge of evidence, it's a sergeant, would come in and process evidence and then check it into the evidence room itself. Our evidence room itself is very outdated. It's not a current, it's not up. Normally they use like high density storage like you'd see in like a medical office or something like that, where they're rolling file cabinets where they back up each other and you can store large amounts of files, etc. in those places.
Let's now talk about the duty room, which also I think doubles as a conference room,
Yes.
also as a training room, and what else is going on in that room?
So that room is basically sort of a catch-all. So we don't have a community room, so we have nowhere to house sort of outreach to the community, whether it's the Citizens Police Academy or anything like that. And like you mentioned, we also use that room as a training room. So our officers require yearly training mandatory training for in-service, etc. But we also can run optional trainings for officers. That training room is just not large enough to do that, and it also serves as a roll call room. So the shift changes are at 8 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and midnight. So during those times, that room's occupied anyway. So your trainings have to be sort of shoehorned in between those times if you're going to use it. It's also the break room for the officers, the lunch room. So an officer coming in off shift to have lunch, there's nowhere for them to eat lunch if we're having a training at the same time. Or an event such as our Citizens Police Academy that we do, normally held during the evenings. If that's going on, now the officer's break room is also occupied. So it's a bit of a challenge with that space as well.
You've got other space challenges, I think, as we shared earlier. The interview rooms. What's that like?
So we don't, normally you'd have an interview room off the lobby where you could bring somebody like we talked about earlier and have that private conversation with them, out of earshot of general public who might be coming in. So you don't have those areas in this current station. There's nowhere to privately talk with a person. We have one interview room and it's right off of the jail cell area called the cell block. So that's the only interview room we have, and it's on the opposite side of the station from the main lobby. So if we were going to bring a victim of a crime in, or interview somebody as a suspect, we have to bring them in the front lobby and all the way through the entire police station to get to that interview room.
What should an interview room look like in terms of the modern police settings today?
So there's different types of interview rooms that you'd normally have at a police station. There's the ones you'd have at the main lobby, which would be for the general public coming in to file a report, etc. Those are generally would have a computer in them, a telephone. They'd be open, sort of have some chairs for people to sit in and feel comfortable speaking to the officer. Then there's the one that would normally be down at the cell block area, which is sort of a hardened area. You don't want a prisoner to be able to pick up a chair that they're sitting in and assault an officer or anybody else that might be in the vicinity. So those rooms are generally with fixed furniture that can't be moved, etc. Then most modern police stations have interview rooms up at detectives also. And those would be used to interview, witnesses, victims of more serious crimes, and also, confidential informants and things like that you normally wouldn't want to bring through the front lobby of the police station and through the entire police station to that interview room that we have here now. So,
Chief, one thing we haven't talked about, and I don't want this to catch you by surprise, but mental health. And in this current state that we're in here vis-a-vis the pandemic, our police are called upon perhaps more frequently with respect to mental health issues. Is our station equipped physically to handle these types of calls?
So yeah, the station itself does not lend itself to that at all. We do have a mental health clinician that works with us. She shares a room with 4 other people, a very small office. She shares it with 2 firearms licensing officers, our animal control officer, and our domestic violence court liaison officer, or advocate rather. So in order for her to be able to speak with somebody that she might need to provide services to, she has to make sure that room isn't occupied, because there's nowhere else for her to really sit. So if there's firearms licensing going on, people coming in for a permit or something like that, she obviously can't use the room then. If the animal control officer's in there, returning phone calls, writing a report, she can't use it then. If the domestic violence advocate is here, well, clearly she couldn't use it then. So we wind up, she has to find other space to use, which again would go back to maybe she'd use our roll call room, which is the training room, the lunch room, everything else. She runs into the same problems there during shift change, if there's a training going on, if there's a community event. So we just don't have a place for her to sit and have her own office with her own computer, her own supplies, where she could sit and have a conversation with a victim or somebody who needs her services.
When we talk about officer safety and officer health for a minute, we talked about how to safeguard against dangerous chemical exposure vis-a-vis things like fentanyl, but there's also the need for making sure that the officers are able to decontaminate, if you will. So let's talk about the lockers and the space and what are the challenges you've got there?
So the locker room is very small for what we have. It was outgrown immediately upon us moving in. We had to take out an area that we had for them to change in, which is outside the showers, and we had to put lockers inside there. So you have a bank of 3 showers and you have lockers 3 feet away. So if someone's trying to shower and there's an officer at their locker, they're practically bumping into each other. Like I said, that main hallway that comes into that locker room, we had to put lockers in there also because we didn't have enough lockers for the officers. So now that hallway leading into that locker room area is very narrow. So 2 people can't possibly walk past each other in that area. And if an officer, like you said, comes in and their clothing is contaminated, it's dirty from a call they had to go on, they have nowhere to sort of change, without running into everything else that's going on in that locker room area. But the locker room area is a big issue in this station, both the male and female side. They're both completely full, and there's no storage in there at all. And if you walked in there, you'd see officers' personal equipment, their boots are just laid outside of their lockers. And oftentimes, when an officer changes, they'll leave their personal clothes, so their street clothes, sitting outside their locker because the locker's full of all their regular uniforms and everything.
So many of these lockers are perhaps more reflective of high school lockers.
Exactly.
Dating back to the 50s and 60s and
That's
70s.
exactly what they are. They're high school lockers. Most modern police stations have large lockers that open up double doors, and they also have storage underneath, which has area for their footgear, their boots, etc. They all have, most modern police stations have power in the lockers because the officers have flashlights, they have radios, they need spare batteries, so they have nowhere to charge their equipment after hours. And in our locker rooms, they're frequently sitting on the sink area, plugged in batteries and everything else in there because they can't do that in their lockers. There's no ventilation in those lockers either. So if an officer comes back from working a shift and it was raining, snow, etc., and they put a wet jacket in their locker, well, there's no ventilation in these lockers. They're all side by side with no ventilation between them. So you can imagine that creates a bit of an issue as well, where most police stations that are built now have ventilation built in their lockers just because of that.
Chief, let's take a moment and talk about your vision for a public safety complex for the police department. What does that look like to you?
So it would be a lot larger than this. The design and the layout of this police station just isn't conducive to being able to efficiently operate. Our booking and our cell area, the cell block, is on the opposite end of the station from the lobby, which we talked about earlier. A modern police station, you'd have a separate door that prisoners would be bailed through, and they'd be able to leave through that door that wouldn't be the same door that the public would enter through. So those areas would be separated. We'd have a larger garage area. Right now we have one garage bay, and that's it. Our old station, we had triple that, right? So we lost space moving from our old station on Lincoln Street to this current building. So we'd have, a couple garage bays. That garage bay would be able to house an ambulance if we needed to get medical treatment for a prisoner. An ambulance could pull in there and put the doors down behind them so the ambulance would be in that secure space. You'd bring a prisoner out and they'd be treated right in the ambulance there. And if needed be, they could be transported right from there or brought back into the cell block area. So you can't fit in the ambulance in our cell block. You can barely fit one car in there right now, actually, in our garage.
So we've got several challenges, primarily around space, efficiency, officer safety, standards for training, standards for community policing, and equally as important is maintaining privacy for our citizens who need to come in contact with the police department for whatever reason. Is there anything else that you could think of that we need to make sure our viewers have a good appreciation for in terms of why we want and need this public safety complex?
Well, I think the points that you hit on are pretty much what we'd be looking for. What I would love to see is a community room right off the lobby that we could use to host community events like our Citizens Police Academy that could be doubled as a training room, so we could host trainings here. There's a benefit to the town by us being able to host trainings, because if we host the training, we generally get seats for free for the class. So example is like FBI offers certain levels of leadership training. They require a 60-seat minimum for an agency to hold that training, and then they'd provide you some seats for free. We can't do that here. We simply don't have the space inside, and we clearly don't have the parking here to do that. So I'd envision a room, off the lobby that could house trainings like that could host community events that we could use, and also perhaps double as an emergency operations center. During a crisis or natural disaster, where we could run emergency operations out of. We do not have anything close to that here.
Chief, thank you for visiting with us today.
Thank you very much.